alert, I'm not. Then again, I do have the mic now. I might go for it. Okay. And I'm gonna go for the hot tea because this afternoon is a little worse. I was telling them that it coats my throat and probably later we'll get something stronger in the tea. Okay. Y'all are gonna need, okay, that's right, I'm in Michigan. I can't, do you guys know what y'all means? Do you know what it is? It does not have a reflection. In the South, it is not a reflection of your intelligence. In the North, it is. I get that. So I'm gonna try to, I've been in the South the last couple of conferences. You guys, yeah, a gentleman. That's where I was this morning. Just use y'all so that he feels included. I got you. Okay. All right. Cost reporting after lunch. Oh my goodness. All right. So this is the what's new portion, but part of this is let's review portion. How many of you have heard me give a cost report speech? Oh, we got newbies. Oh, a couple. What is the thing that I'm going to say 500 times during this presentation? If you've ever heard me before. What is the foundation of RHC cost reporting? How is the rate calculated? Oh, I know. Oh, you know this one if you have ever heard it. Nothing? No one? Cost divided by visits equals your rate in its simplest form. You're going to see it, you're going to hear it, and then we're going to talk about the variations and the things that might pull out of the cost and the visits. But if there's one thing I want you to understand is that this is a cost base on the Medicare side. This is a cost-based program. On the Michigan Medicaid side, it is a PPS. You still get your rate set based on cost, but then it indexes up from your base year. Getting ready for fall. We're going to the oranges. I heard this morning that Krispy Kreme. Okay, go back. You guys don't even have Krispy Kreme up here, do you? Yeah, you did. You did. Okay, so a little history. I'm just all messed up because I have we got this place in Florida, right? So, and the HOA has this streaming cable, and so when I'm on the road, even at my house, I run Florida cable. So I live in Georgia, but I watch Orlando news. So this morning, upstairs this morning, I was watching news out of Orlando. And exactly, I'm in Michigan watching from Georgia, watching news out of Orlando. But apparently on the news in Orlando this morning, they had a segment about Krispy Kreme putting their pumpkin spice donuts out this morning. It's like, isn't it not even the 10th of August yet, right? In the spirit of we are so ready in the South, let me say one more thing because we are trying to stretch it, right? You know, I was on the phone the other day with one of my Michigander colleagues or clients, I can't remember which one, and I said, okay, do you know how you guys in the winter, January, you're just like, I don't want to leave the house, I'm just staying in. That's how we feel in August. Just don't, yes, I don't want to, it is hot. You don't want to walk outside, and if you do, you want to walk from your house to your car and back to your, the way you guys look at January is how we look at August. And so I am so ready to get out of the 100-degree heat indexes with 90% humidity. I am so ready. I know you guys are just basking and loving it. In the South, we're done. We're just done. So we're going with fall colors. Cost divided by visits equals your rate. Okay. I'm just going to try to walk you through how this works, because if there's one thing that I see in the RHC community, it is that, you know, the folks on the ground that are getting it done. And we went through the logistics this morning. We went through all the things you've got to do. But when it comes to how you reimburse and how you really get paid, and why does that matter, and why are they asking me for how many people work here, and how does that feed into it? They don't know. So if we do anything, we're going to try to just do some basic education for those of you who are new to this concept, And for those of you who are not new to the concept, we're going to talk about a few little things that have changed over the years, and I'm going to try to keep a voice for the next 2 hours. First of all, the cost reports where you get paid. You can do claims all year long, and again, I don't read slides. You can do claims all year long, and at the end of it, the cost report's like your tax return. You get your rate, cost divided by visits equals your rate. You multiply that by the number of visits you did, and that's what Medicare says they owe you. They back off what they have paid you on a claim by claim basis. And who owes who. And it could go one way or the other. This is not a guaranteed. And this is also where you get paid for your flu, pneumococcal, and monoclonal antibodies and COVID vaccines. All right, so let me regroup here. When we're doing a cost report at this level, what are they asking you for? What are the things that I need to have? We good?
Just, it's harder, we getting comments, it's a little harder for them to hear.
Probably because I'm all over. Okay, ready? Is this better? Yay, okay. Just don't make me stand behind. Okay, we're going for more tea. Probably need to go for the coffee. Because there's two variations of this presentation I give. There are, and I've given this at this conference previously, where we just go through the basics of the cost report, and we go through all the worksheets, everything you do. And then if I've done that before, which I have for you guys, I like to do the same thing. So what I'm trying to do here is give you some basics and take you through some new stuff, but I am happy to stop at any point and talk about anything. So the first thing we're going to do for the newbies is, if you are the manager of the clinic, you are working in the clinic, these are the kind of things that your cost report preparer is going to need. They're going to need financial statements. They're going to need visits by practitioner type, and you'll get, of course, all these slides. They're going to want to know clinic hours of operation, because they have to report that by day. FTE calculations, and we're going to go a little bit further and deeper into that today. They need to know the total number of clinical staff hours worked during the cost report period. Some other information, setting you up to get your cost report packet ready, whether you're giving it to your finance team, whether you're giving it to an outside consultant. I'm setting you up to give the information to the folks that are going to do the cost report. You have to have salaries by employee type. You have to have vaccine logs and invoices. So let's stop there, and I'm going to say it a few times today as well. First of all, where's my star student? Where is she?
Right there, I left.
She did. She's not okay. What are the three types of vaccines that are paid outside of the rate that are paid through the cost report? Quiz. Pneumococcal, influenza, COVID. Good. And then monoclonal antibodies, if you're still doing any of those. So when I say vaccine logs and invoices, I am only talking about those vaccines that are paid outside of the rate, the pneumococcal, the influenza, and the COVID. Invoices, if I could blow that up to a 60 font with bold, I would. If there is one thing that I'm telling you, they're killing us on vaccines these days. And they're wanting the invoices. So when you buy the flu vials, when you buy the pneumo vials, make sure that you throw those invoices in a folder, and that they go to your cost report preparer, and that they go with the cost report. Now, some of you guys, that's done at a level way above you, and you just need to tell the folks in your finance team that the MACs are really looking at vaccines right now, and they're wanting to tie it back to invoices. It's just the low-hanging fruit that their basic auditors can do. They put it on an audit program tied to invoices, and they're just making some crazy adjustments. Sometimes in the favor of the clinic. You're going to need telehealth volume, because as I was explaining to the table, the one gentleman left in our midst, that telehealth, not mental health telehealth, but physical telehealth, it has its own payment rate. Does everybody know that? It's 99 something. It's not paid at the all-inclusive rate as of right now. So you need to know that volume. CCM volume, because CCM is paid at its own payment rate. And you need to know related party transaction information. Some more information, again, in my fall pumpkin Krispy Kreme colors. Medicare bad debt, your laboratory costs, your x-ray, and then your PSNR net. Right now, we're just gathering information. These are the information that you have to gather. Here are the important pieces of that, because again, it's cost divided by visits equals our rate. So we've gathered all the cost data, we've kept up with our invoices, we have those logs, patient name, their insurance number, the date you gave it for the flu, pneumo, COVID. Got all our logs, we pulled our PSNR. We're pulling visits this year because we are in the session called What's New. Mental health telehealth, 1/1 is actually 1/1/22, so it would have been the cost report we just filed. Because it is paid outside of the rate, we have to pull it out of the rate. So let's just go back to that simple concept again. Cost divided by visits equals our rate. That is RHC cost divided by RHC visits equals our rate. Anything that is paid outside of the rate, differently than the rate, over and above the rate, can't go in. The cost of it has to be pulled out of the cost bubble. The visits don't get counted in the visit count because it's paid under a separate method. So when we're talking about mental health telehealth that just got pulled back in, you had been excluding all those visits prior to 22. If it's paid under the rate, it gets counted in the cost, it gets counted in the visits. If it is paid outside of the rate, you've got to pull the cost out and we don't count it in the visits. That's the easiest way for me to tell you how this works. So what does count as a visit? In-person visits, mental health telehealth, because they're paid at the rate, right? Physical telehealth is non-RHC because it's paid at that 99 rate. So what is a mental health telehealth? It is the 900 codes. And actually, I'm sorry that it's up to 99 and some change it now. So if it's mental health telehealth, if it's a revenue code 521, it's considered a physical telehealth. If it's a 900 code, that's the only way you're going to get paid at that AIR. So it's these codes here. It's those 9,000 codes. One of the questions that I was starting to get during cost report season was, okay, we do a lot of telehealth and it's for anxiety, it's for depression, it's for mental health issues. But it's not a therapy session. It's not the 9,000 codes, the 907, 908 codes. It's a 521 with anxiety. That is a telehealth, a normal physical telehealth. Just because you have a mental health diagnosis on the claim does not make it, at this point in time, a mental health telehealth.
So we have a question. Should we eliminate commercial visits from this count also?
No. Correct. Because what we're trying to do here is I feel like we should have gone, just should have redone last year. So I'm just gonna kind of in my head give that to you. How about that? Total cost divided by total visits equals our cost per visit. And then we reconcile it to Medicare. But when we're coming up with what does it cost us to see the patient, to make the widget, to do the service? It is the cost of our business, the cost of rural health clinic cost divided by visits, by total visits for all payers, equals our rate that we're going to get paid. There are 5 things that are paid outside of the rate. There are probably more, but there's 5 big things that are paid outside of the rate. Lab, X-ray, and EKG, technical components, CCM, and telehealth. If it is paid outside of the rate, if it is paid differently than the rate, if it is paid using a different fee schedule than the rate, the cost doesn't go in and it doesn't count as a visit. Because we are trying to come to cost per visit, cost per patient we see. What it costs to make the widget, what it costs to see a patient, any patient. And then that is what Medicare uses to pay you for their patients. There are caps there. Your provider base less than 50 beds that you were enrolled or you had your application in prior to 12/31/2020, you have grandfather rates. If you are independent, there's a whole other schedule. And I think we're about to get to those. Any questions on just as a whole, why we include all of our visits? Because we're trying to determine the cost to see a patient, any patient. The only thing we exclude are the things that aren't paid, that are paid outside of the rate. If it is paid outside of the rate, we pull the cost out and we don't include it in the visit count.
So for telehealth, that one, I mean, I understand lab and imaging, EKGs, but telehealth, that's care being delivered virtually by a physician who's working on the RFC. How is that time that they spend in doing that pulled out of the cost?
Okay, so he's asking about telehealth. Said it's time spent in the clinic. How are we pulling that out? We pull out the labor component and overhead allocates itself the way this cost report works.
And I do have a few slides that will go back over that again.
I understand it, it doesn't make sense to me that it's the same exact care that's being delivered for many in-person visits, it's just being done virtually. So the same thing with culture with telephone visits.
It's a national issue. I mean, if you're familiar with breaking my own rule.
It's a national issue. It's, if you're familiar with the National Association for Rural Health Clinics, they certainly continue to try to get that parity. It's just not there yet, but the push is still happening on the Hill.
I think it's because of the term face-to-face encounter being defined as well, what qualifies as RHC.
Correct. And also, it's not a bad thing, I don't think. Because depending on who you're having to do the calculation, the way I'm doing the calculation, I'm not pulling out, I mean, what I pull out is not, because those visits are smaller. I think it leaves you with a higher cost per visit. That's just me personally. Some other information before we kind of get, and then we're going to kind of recap where we just were. Some other information. Again, you're gathering information right now. This is just talking about the stuff we have to have, why we have to have it, why folks are asking you for this. They have to give on this cost report clinic hours of operation by day. It has to be a military time format. They're also going to ask you about commercial malpractice insurance. They're going to ask if you're in any payment models, if you have any visiting nurse services, or if you're in that program,
You would know it if you were doing it because it's a big deal. The more relevant topics at this point are to confirm who's going to electronically sign your cost report. For hospitals, you're part of the hospital's cost report. So it's going to be your hospital folks. Are you enrolled in any demonstration projects? Let me just hammer into this one for a little bit. Who here's in an ACO? And let's try an ACOs. Do you know what stage you are in an ACO? Are you risk-based? Are you still upside only? That's something everyone needs to have a firm grasp on in the coming years. Because what I'm seeing in the ACO arena is that it is a phased program. And when you're coming in at the first level of phases, you have zero risk. It's upside only. It's like getting a tip on top. It's you report quality, they give you money, everybody's happy. But as they move into some ACOs, as they move into later phases of the ACO process, they move to this program called direct contracting, DCE. And that's where it flips into a capitation arrangement for you. And there is a downside risk at some point in that. But when they flip, just you're going to be watching for the words direct contracting entity, DCE, and capitation. And that means that the payments go straight to the ACO. And the ACO pays you. At that point, those quality tip on top payments stop. Because at the end of the day, you are going to get reconciled on this cost report back to your rural health clinic rate and only your rural health clinic rate. So it's really about awareness at this point for folks to understand that when you move to that DCE model, you can do that, especially I know with some large hospital systems, they're in it because their hospital system is the ACO. And they need to be to help their hospital. And there are reasons for you to do that. But your financial folks need to understand that at the end of the day, you're coming back to cost divided by visits equals your rate. And that's what you're going to get paid. Because it's going to reconcile. We just started seeing this they're called PSNRs, Provider Statistical and Summary Reports. It's a claim summary report from Medicare, and we have just started seeing the direct contracting entity enter the PSNRs in some of our clinics. And what we're finding out is you're just getting, and it's fine. You're going to get your RHC rate at the end of the day, but you should understand that, especially if maybe it's a lot of work for you and it's not a lot of benefit for you. The other reasons that you might be in an ACO is because, and as Jill and I were talking this morning, it'll pull your quality scores up, possibly, and that could get you more money on your commercial side. So there's other reasons, but in the end, you're going to get reconciled to your rural health clinic rate. Some other new things, and again, we're all about new things here on this particular presentation. So we are, and again, I'm going to give you both presentations, but we're going to have what's new up here. Cost divided by visits equals our rate. Cost is in 3 sections. There's healthcare cost, there's overhead cost, and there's non-RHC cost. Those things that are paid outside of the rate, they come down to this bottom section, and that overhead allocates itself based upon the top and the bottom, the ratio of RHC cost to non-RHC cost. Now that's for the lab, the x-ray, the EKG, the CCM, and telehealth. And there are specific lines for CCM and telehealth on the cost report. There's specific instructions that it has to come into that non-RHC cost center. Visits are subject to a productivity standard. It is actual, the greater of, actual, or minimum. And the minimum is determined on these FTEs. Over the last couple of years, because with COVID, you could just say COVID. And you could get an exception to this FTE. The productivity standard. So we really are now flipping back into, okay, it's important again, we really have to pay attention to how we are calculating our FTEs, because we've got our cost. Now we're dividing it by visits, but that visits are subject to this minimum. Make sure that when you are calculating your FTEs that you're taking out medical director time, preceptor time. It should be just your face-to-face patient time. And some charting there as well, but it should not include preceptor time. If your providers round at the hospital, you don't want to include that. Again, it's paid outside of the rate. That's not an RHC visit. Those inpatient visits are not RHC visits. And when we're looking at FTEs, we're only including clinicians, but we do need the total clinical hours for our vaccine calculations. When we're doing carve-outs, we're going to put our medical director wages into the medical director cost center. We're going to pull any admin down to admin, and inpatient is going to come out. The wages have to be broken down by these categories. So as you are gathering your information, you have to have it into these categories, and it should agree to your financial statements. All right, so I've thrown a lot of new stuff at you. So let's back up. RHC costs divided by RHC visits equals our rate. The cost, if it is paid outside of the rate, we have to pull it out of the cost. What are the top five? What are the 5 things that are paid outside of the rate? Lab, X-ray, EKG, telehealth, CCM, because they're paid on their own fee schedule. So we're going to pull them out of the cost. We're going to make some reclassifications for those. They don't go into visits. Telehealth, that physical telehealth, because it's paid on its own fee schedule, right, wrong, because it's paid on its own fee schedule, don't include it in that visit count. Equals our rate. That visit count is subject to a productivity standard. That is 4,200 per medical, per doctor, FTE, 2,100 for APP. And that is full-time equivalent. So I'm gonna, forgive me if you have heard this analogy, but let's just say she and I, we are your nurse practitioners. She works 2 days a week. I work 2 days a week. We are at 0.8 FTE. It is not warm bodies. It is full-time equivalents. So together we would take that minimum of 2,100 for a full-time FTE and multiply it by 0.8 to get our minimum. And then if you're our doctor and you're full-time, you're 4,200. So you would take your 4,200 times our, whatever that math is, that's the minimum. It is not, we don't look at your visits against your minimum and your visits against your minimum. It is one big happy family, bottom line, when we look at the visits. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question of mine. It is asking, what is the 5th service that is taken off in cost report?
Okay. Lab, X-ray, EKG, CCM, telehealth. Those are the kind of the top 5 that we see most commonly. Okay. And visits are subject to a minimum. It's applied in aggregate. 4,200 for a full-time position, 2,100 for a full-time APP. I get this question a lot. Okay, but what's the, because people want to, I don't know if they want to use this to get their providers to work more, but they ask me what the penalty is. If we don't make that standard, what's the penalty? And I need to switch your thinking just a little bit. From penalty to the equation. Cost, RHC cost, we've removed everything that's paid outside of the rate. RHC cost divided by RHC visits, and the RHC visits are subject to a minimum. So it's not that it's a penalty, it just changes the number in the equation. If they don't make it, if you as a group, if the three of us as a group, let's just say our minimum was 6,000. We only did 5,200. Cost divided by visits. Are my visits 5,200 or 6,000? Who says 5,200? Just raise your hands. Who says 6,000? 6,000 is the greater of actual or minimum. So it's not that it's a penalty that you didn't make it. It just changes the number in the equation, which changes your rate. Following me? It's not a penalty, it just changes that block in the equation, because it's the greater of minimum in aggregate. Nobody's looking at me, all three of us individually, it's all together. To do cost divided by visits equals our rate. So we've got our cost. We've got our visits. Hold up. It's actually net of vaccine costs. So let's look at vaccines, because it's the RHC cost, because these also are paid over and above and outside the rate. So on that settlement worksheet I told you about, where it's cost divided by visits, it's cost, but then they back out the cost of providing these vaccines. So it's a net cost. So how do we calculate this? See, I don't have enough hands yet. I have to have a hand to gesture with. You guys passed the test. That it is flu, pneumo, COVID, MABs. The change for this that happened, I guess it's almost an old change at this point, but I just want to remind everybody, Medicare Advantage COVID-19, that first year, they were included. They were paid through this cost report. They are no longer. You have to bill those to that Med Advantage plan, or however you're contracted with the Medicare Advantage plan, it is paid through the Medicare Advantage plan. You will include influenza and pneumococcal invoices. Remember the big font, bold, red invoices. Be sure to keep up with those invoices. The logs for your Medicare go with the cost report. You need to be able to pull logs on everybody if you need it, because I have had them do that. Don't include the VFC, because they're trying to get a cost per. You don't pay for VFC. If you put the VFC in here, it skews the whole equation. And so what we have found through audits, through discussions with the max, is you leave the VFCs off the count. Because you have to have, because it's that same concept. You're trying to determine through this vaccine worksheet the cost to make the widget, the cost to provide the vaccine to anybody and everybody. So you do total cost, total vaccines. It costs us $109 per vaccine. And then Medicare says, well, you gave 10 of them, you give 100 of them, and that's what we owe you. But they want to know what it costs you to give the vaccine to anybody and everybody. But if you put that VFC in there, because you don't pay for the vaccines on the VFCs, it skews the calculation. So we pull those out. You want to be careful because it can dilute what you're getting paid if you run and you put those VFCs in there as well. Make sure you keep your logs. Okay, so we've talked about cost. We've talked about the things that are paid outside of the rates. We're going to pull out the cost. We're not going to include the visit. We went over to the visit page and we talked about be careful with your FTEs. If you have a real event, a real reason why you couldn't make your productivity standard, I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head, especially like, let's just say you were in a seasonal town. For instance, Beaver Island, we do Beaver Island's cost report. They seem to be fine, but if they ever weren't, I would use that they're seasonal and they're an island, they're a seasonal island clinic. And I could request an exception to the productivity standard for them. No, because it's not, she asked about if maternity leave would count, but you're gonna reduce the FTE. So you don't ask for an exception to the whole thing, you just reduce, so if, not me, because I'm a grandma now, so no, just no. But, and she, I don't even say her, jinx her, but if one of your, yeah, was out for 4 months, then you only have 8 months, and whatever that comes out to be the point, whatever. Yeah, and then if they come back part-time for a period of time, then calculate it using, okay, we did 3 months at 20 hours a week, and then she went back to 40. I mean, really, let's dig down in, especially when you're close. And some clinics aren't close. It's when you are close. You know, when you look at actual versus a productivity standard, you guys are, that's when it really makes sense to really dig down deep into that and keep good documentation. Cost, visits subject to the productivity standard. And we're gonna take one little pause at vaccines. Pneumococcal, influenza, COVID. Now here we're gonna have to start paying for COVID vaccines if we give them. You guys hearing that? Yeah. So we're gonna have cost at that point. And then we get over to worksheet C or M3 on provider-based, because these provider-based, you guys are an M series, which is a chapter within the book that is your hospital's cost report. You are chapter M. It can be combined for all your clinics, it can be individual for each one, it just depends on how it's set up for you. Make sure, going back to visits for just a second, hospital rounding doesn't get in there. Those telehealth that are paid outside of that are paid on a fee schedule aren't in there. Watch your FTEs. And then we get over to the settlement worksheet. We've got cost less the vaccine calculation. Then we get net cost divided by the visits, the greater of minimum or actual. And that's our cost per visit. Then I start splitting you into groups. You're either grandfathered provider-based or independent or non-grandfathered provider-based. Do you know what you are? If you were in the program attached to a less than 50 bed hospital, you were in the program prior to 12/31/20 or had applied prior to 12/31/20, you're in the grandfathered side. Everybody else is in the non-grandfathered side. For the non-grandfathered side, you're currently sitting at 126 as your, because there's a ceiling. There's a cost divided by visits, and then you have a ceiling. With your ceiling, everybody's got one now. So that's a change. That's something very different from where we used to be. It used to be, if you were provider-based less than 50 beds, you just got your cost. Whatever it was every year, you just got your cost. Now I'm getting phone calls like, hey, my CFO just told me I've got to do this, this, and this, and look at this cost, and look at that cost. I've never had that request before. What's up? Well, because you do have a cap now, but it's going to be your cap is your cap, your cap is your cap, your cap is your cap. And it's based upon your 2020 cost report. And then it's indexed up by the MEI each year. So if your 2020 cost report finalized out at a $200 rate. That is your base year cap. And then that base year cap for that clinic is gonna index up by the Medicare Economic Index, which has ranged historically between 1 to 2, 1 to 3%. I think we got a 3.8% last year because of the cost of living every year. If yours was 210 in 2020, that becomes your base year cap. And it gets indexed up by the Medicare Economic Index every year thereafter, as long as your parent hospital shows less than 50 beds. If they eke up past that 50 beds, then you lose your grandfather as well. Okay? And if yours is 250, then you're lucky and they hate you. But then you start at 250 and you get indexed up. That's your base year cap, but everybody has a cap. And if this table is independent or attached to a larger than 50 bed hospital, we currently sit at 126. We're in a ramp up period of $13 a year. So it's going to be 126, 139, 152 till we get up to 190 in 2028. And then it's going to act like what we just talked about. It's going to go from 190 up based on the MEI every year. Follow me? Provider-based, attached to less than 50 bed hospitals, you have a base year cap that indexes on the MEI. Independents, and those that attached to a greater than 50 bed hospital, you are in a ramp up period, $13 a year till we get to 190, and then you start indexing out by the MEI. Because it's cost divided by visits equals our rate subject to a cap. And everybody can have a different cap depending on who they are and what their status is. So then we find out, because it's subject to a cap, so what's your rate? Cost, it's going to be the lesser of your actual cost or your cap. Now, mind you, they had a big influx of patients this year. Something happened in their patient mix. When we did their cost report, oh, this is not a good thing. She's like, maybe I should just pick on Reza. But we did your cost report, and your cost divided by visits is 235 this year. What are you getting? 255 or 235? 235. Because that is not a rate, it is a cap. It is a ceiling. Now I'm starting to walk through the crowd now.
Good thing you have that money.
I'm telling you, I can't speak behind that. Don't think just because you have that great cap. We were actually talking about that earlier at my lunch table or at my table of origin. That just because you have this great cap, grandfather cap, doesn't mean you're going to get it. It depends on where your cost per visit is going to land that year. Okay. So then we say our rate is lesser of actual or cap. We'll go with 200. And we pull that PSNR. We find out what our Medicare visits are. Preventive, there's some preventive that goes in there. I'm not even going to get into that. Brouhaha. Do you guys know what brouhaha is in Michigan? It's a hot mess. Then we add in Medicare bad debt. So what is Medicare bad debt? Medicare bad debt, deductibles and co-insurance on Part A Medicare patients. If you can't tie it back to a Part A Medicare paid remittance advice, this isn't not unpaid or denied claims, deductibles and or co-insurance, Part A paid deductible, paid claim, deductibles or co-insurance, then it doesn't go on this log. That's the only thing that goes on this log. even if you didn't have it before, you could have it now, especially with rising caps on the independents. Do we even have any, well, I don't know. I don't know what we have.
We did have a couple independents.
When you're doing a bad debt log, see, for some of our independents, there was just not that much difference, especially on the dual eligibles. Because the Medicaid was picking it up, the rest of the co-insurance. But as they inch up, 126, 139, wherever they're gonna get. Well, let's just say we're at 150 on it, the cap in a couple of years, 152. Well, your 20% is now $30. And your Medicaid rate, let's just say, is 100. So Medicaid's at $100, they're cutting you off. The other $30 can go on this log. Or they're saying Medicare's already paid what we would have paid, so they pay zero. The rest, where before it didn't matter because Medicaid picked it up. Now they're not. So it can become more important. Yes.
Isn't the patient responsible for 20% of them?
Talking about Medicare and Medicaid dual eligibles. Yep. So on a Medicaid, let's see where we're going with this. There are, what are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing great. Right. So when you're talking about Medicare, this is all the new stuff. I'm just giving you the full experience, I guess. For Medicare bad debt, and let me get my train of thought back here. There are two buckets, if you will. Can pay but won't. Non-indigent. Can't pay, indigent. For the can pay but won't, you have to send bills the same, you have to collect on them the same way you would collect on any other patient. The rule is consistency. Don't ever have a Medicare collection policy. No. You have to be consistent among all payer types. You can have something at the bottom of that policy that says, and if it's a Medicare patient, it gets written off to the log after write-off, but the way you collect on it has to be the same. And it has to be a minimum of 120 days. So if your policy is 90, you have to go a minimum of 120. Normal collection efforts that you would any other patient, and then you can write it off to this log. If they're in the can't pay bucket, they're Medicaid eligible, you can't bill for it. You bill Medicare, you bill Medicaid, and anything that's left goes to this log. Co-insurance and deductible wise. That gets complicated in Michigan, but I'm not even going to go there. Okay, Medicare bad debt. Any questions on Medicare bad debt? We just did the really high level of that. Okay. One more stop that I think is worth mentioning. When we do cost, if you have any related party transactions, most of you guys at the hospital base, that's just that it really doesn't apply to you because you guys are getting hospital allocations and it's all at cost. But especially my independents, what we see a lot is where the doctor owns the building and also owns the practice, and there's rent that's paid between the two, and there's a reason for that for tax purposes. But we have to go back to cost of ownership. So if you're buying services from a related party, it has to be at the related party's cost. There cannot be a profit factor there. But we've already talked about these because we kind of went in order in the narrative. Lab, X-ray, EKG, what are the other two? CCM and telehealth, that's right. That are the top five. There's pharmacy as well. There might be some others. These are just the ones that I see on a regular basis. The top five that are usually present, at least these three on most of my clinics. So when you're taking out lab, X-ray, and EKG, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can, if you've got people inside, how many people, well, I can't tell, sorry. If you have people that are dedicated doing it, because you're pulling out the labor cost. So we were talking about earlier, how do you just pull that out? It's so integrated. Well, you're going to pull out the labor component, and then the overhead allocates itself. It's just the way this cost report, that middle section overhead, it just calculates within this cost report. So the only responsibility you have for these carve outs is the direct. The lab, X-ray, and EKG. You want to know the direct, that labor component, that direct cost that you need to pull down into that non-reimbursable cost center. If you have dedicated staff, you can pull it straight down. If you don't, if you're like most of our small clinics, then you have people wearing multiple hats. And what we usually do on those is do an average time per test. You can either do some time studies on those. If you don't, you can use a really conservative industry average, somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes per test. So you just run a report of all the tests you did, and you can multiply that by an average hourly wage. Anyway, you're trying to get that labor component down. CCM. CCM is a different question, because we talked about pulling the labor component down so that it will pull overhead. But with CCM, with the gentleman that was here earlier, if he's going to do that for you, if it's outsourced, and I
Not necessarily for them, but they're gonna do a consult in order to see if there's opportunity.
okay. There are some companies that say we're doing, look, you just give us some access and we're going to do it for you. They're not using your water, your lights, your break room. So you don't want it to grab overhead. So you're only going to pull that labor, that direct cost down into a non-reversible cost center if you want it to pull overhead. Lab, X-ray, and EKG, you do. CCM, it's a question. Is it in-house or is it outsourced? If it's in-house, we're going to reclassify because we need to pull, because these people are living in your space. Maybe they're your MA and they just do it in between patients. And then we can just say, okay, how many did we do? How many hours did, and then multiply that by the billing 20-minute minimum and go from there. But if you're using an outside vendor, we're just going to pull that out. Telehealth, we have to figure out mental health versus physical. Mental health, it stays in. Remember, the visit stays in, the cost stays in. The physical telehealth, we've got to pull that labor component down so that it can pull over it. What you don't want to do, because I need for you to understand this cost report, how it works. Overhead allocates itself. This report does a back end calculation. So what you don't want to do is pull in fringe benefits, pull in any sort of capital costs. It's going to do it itself. And if you pull it down, it's going to double dip. So when we're talking about leaving things in this non-reversible cost center, you just don't want to double dip. Labor component, direct cost only gets pulled down. How do we pull down telehealth? That was tough. When we went through this first time, we were trying to figure out how to do this. This is what I found, that my clinics fell into one of these three camps. They either had, and I only have maybe one, my lovely Arkansas clinic, if you're on, you know who you are. Complete time data. They're keeping up with it. She can tell you down to the minute. Or you kept it for a little while so you can get a good average time per, or you didn't do any. The goal in all of this, regardless of what camp you fall in, is to determine the total telehealth time that you had. If you kept complete records, well, you just multiply that by your wages and you can get that. Just remember though, when they're doing those calculations, this is probably not gonna be the people in this room, they're doing those calculations. But if you, especially if you had some significant telehealth time, do you remember how we talked about it's RHC cost divided by RHC visits, right? And that visit was subject to a minimum. How do we get the minimum? What was our data point? FTEs. Well, telehealth is paid outside of the rates. We're pulling the visits out, the cost out, also have to pull the FTE out. Because if one of the three, let's just say we're going back to this table here. She's only telehealth. Let's just pretend for a second. We have a whole new calculation of FTEs. She doesn't go into it. That makes sense? So when you're giving them FTEs, make sure that your telehealth FTE gets pulled off of that. If you kept no time records, what those three camps did, they kept them all, kept partial so we could extrapolate onto what we thought the telehealth time was. If they kept none, we use CPT codes. If we could pull those, because they have definitions within the CPTs. This one's a 20-minute visit, this one's a 45-minute visit. So we use those. That's just the best. At this point, it's good faith effort with data, as much data as you can back up to pull these out. And if you need an example of a time study, we have this. This is a sample. It's only a sample. 1 week a month, not the same week every month. I like schedules. Usually when we do time studies like this, it's for the smaller clinics with owners. And we're trying to validate owner's compensation. That's when we usually use these time studies because they are running the business, they're seeing patients, they're doing it on their weekend. They really are, because they're business owners, it's a whole different mindset. With your clinicians, usually a schedule work. Just remember, when we are talking about the things we're going to carve out, and we're asking our folks for time because we're trying to get a labor component from them, right? To pull it down. That it is human nature to overstate the amount of time it takes you to do something. I worked hard. Oh my goodness, it takes me 30 minutes to run each one of those lab tests. You not know, I ran 300 of them last month. Let them know less is better. If you're doing some time studies to see how much labor component you really have to pull down, whether it's telehealth, whether it's any of those 5, they need to, as you're giving the instructions to your staff, please tell them accurate, hands-on only, do not inflate. Again, it's just human nature that you want your boss to think you worked harder than you have.
We do nursing home visits today.
Okay, nursing home visits. Where do nursing home visits? Nursing home visits, if that's what you choose to do, is to make them rural health clinic visits. Then they go in visits like any other visit. The time that your practitioner spent at the nursing home goes into the time like any other time. My caution about nursing home visits, because I'm seeing questions about it. I'm seeing a lot of clinics consider adding that. Number one, depends on your grandfather rate, because Medicare rates are pretty good. Number two, remember, if all of a sudden you decide that this nursing home is now going to be an RHC, the rounding at this nursing home is going to be RHC, this equation changes. Your visit number just went up. And if your cap is, what do we make that? 200. And you add all these visits, your rate could now be 175. Because it's not a rate, it's a cap. And that's what we found. I could give you examples. I did a feasibility study just recently of a clinic in South Carolina that was gonna open up. Have some limited RHC hours, but their main business was nursing home, and we told them no. That is not a good move for you. Because you just don't have enough, I mean, because you don't have the capital cost. The visits are quicker, or they can be. And it can dilute your rates. You just really need to see before you go and add a bunch of nursing, unless you're already there. But before you add something like that, you need to be careful. Yes, ma'am.
Question in the chat, time studies use only hands-on time, not time for the time involved in processing labs.
Correct. Here's why.
Great question.
Lab, X-ray, and EKG are split billed. The technical component is paid outside of the rate. The professional component is part of the rate. Or no, I said that backwards. Did I say that backwards? Yes. No, that's how they say it, but when you read up what that means, because I read it at least once a year, trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, what does that? The person that is doing the test, that's paid outside of the rate. The venipuncture is inside the rate. And the process, the other reason you don't do processing time is because, okay, I'm getting this test ready. Go. Okay, now I'm gonna get this test ready. Go. Now I'm gonna do this test. Go. Each one of them takes 10 minutes. Do I take the 3 minutes it took me to do each of those, or am I doing 30? I've done other things during that time. And if not, you're gonna double count. If you're actually doing work on it, yes. But you might be going to room another patient. You might be going on to this next test. I would be very careful with processing time unless you're just sitting watching it. Because you're moving on to other tests. Does that make sense? Okay. I think I went the wrong direction at first. Stump the consultant time. Almost got there. All right, cost reporting. I think we're done with cost reports. What else we got? Cost reporting. What's the equation? Okay, come on, what is it? What is it? How many times have I said this? Cost divided by distance equals our rate. What are the 5 things that are paid outside of the rate? Lab, X-ray, EKG, telehealth, CCM. And if it's paid outside of the rate, it doesn't go in the cost worthy, is it? If I get that, then it's been a successful session.
Okay, one more question. See if this is a stumper for you, Julie. If you are a clinic owner.
Clinic owned.
And you do not bill for services, you are not a billable provider. Do you still have to complete the provider time study monthly? Want me to repeat that?
No, I understand the question, and I'm gonna say yes. How else are we going to prove to the auditor why I put $200,000 worth of pay for you on that cost report?
Okay.
If you don't, yeah, I mean, if you're just an owner and you don't do anything. But if we're going to justify compensation of an owner, and this is more in the privately owned arena. Especially in the privately owned arena. If you are a sole proprietor or a partnership, and we've been successful with S Corps as well, although that's iffy. I can add reasonable compensation, whether it was paid or not. Sole proprietors, partners, and again, we've been successful with S Corps. So if we've got an owner, sometimes the cash flow gets weird. And I've got an owner that was only able to pay herself, and I Had one in Louisiana. $30,000. Because they were just maybe getting up off the ground. I know she's there working 50 hours a week. Doing this, that. I'm gonna add the value of the services up to 50 hours a week. But if that gets audited, they're gonna wanna know what, that's something that supports 50 hours a week. It's really about owner's compensation and validating it. Do you have to? No. If you get audited, might you reduce your expenses? Yes. All right, next. Yes,
I have a question about the vaccine.
vaccines.
Yeah. So is it both the, so is it like Prevnar 20, I'm new to this whole thing, so is
Okay.
it like Prevnar 20 and Pneumo 23 that count for that?
Yes, and yes, and yes.
Okay.
So the question is, I'm gonna rephrase. We have a boatload. Trying to think of a really hit southern term, but it's not coming to me right now. Of types of pneumococcal vaccines that we can give. Prevnar, 23, 20, all of those. There's only one column. They all get dumped into one column. As of today, there's only one column. Same thing for high dose flu and normal flu. They just average it. Just do an average.
RSV will maybe be put in a different category, so.
I don't think so, unless they, as a country, see it as much of a threat as COVID. I don't see RSV getting its own now. So they got, they just added COVID, but that's not new. They did, remember when H1N1 was a thing? So we had 4 columns back when we had H1N1. We had a column just for the H1N1 vaccine, and then we had a column for the combined flu H1N1. And then after that crisis went away, we collapsed down to the flu and pneumo again. Now we have flu, pneumo, COVID. So if they ever take and bundle COVID into like a flu vaccine, which I mean, I'm hearing rumblings, then that'll collapse back down again. But if they feel like it's enough of a public health issue that they want to promote it, yes, they can. I haven't heard any rumblings of adding RSV. Next. Okay, you want to take 5 minutes then?